So I told you at the start of the show, we have a guest joining us, Dr. Everett Piper. He joins us. It's a great thing this happens. He joins us the first Tuesday of every month, and you probably recognize his name. He is the author of that extremely great, initially just a statement to his campus, eventually became a book, This Is Not a Daycare, and basically the idea of talking to college students about the role of colleges is not to make sure that you are coddled and protected, but in fact you come to college to learn, to engage in a robust exchange of ideas. So he was a great college professor. He's the author of Not a Daycare. He's now a Washington Times columnist and a pundit. I guess that word has negative connotations. A commentator in many programs around the country. So without further ado, welcome, Dr. Piper.
Thank you for having me on, Debbie. It's my pleasure.
So glad you're here. I see you have on your Not a Daycare shirt. Is that right?
I do, and you know that I've already apologized to you for my attire, but with the quarantine, you'll have to excuse me.
I think you look great. I was bragging about this shirt. I think it'd be fun to have one. So before you launch into this interview, I want to mention for our listeners, you can follow Dr. Piper on Twitter at Dr. Everett, Everett Piper, at Dr. Everett Piper. As I say, he's also a columnist on the Washington Times, writes just great, thoughtful, deep columns. So before we get into some of the things you wrote about, do you, as a college professor, if you're still, or a college president, if you're still back in those days, can you envision what you'd be talking to your students about the virus, responding to it, and the need to have a sense of standing up for their country, standing up for freedom? Do those arguments, my first time, they resonate with you at all?
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the things that is implicit in your opening five is the value and the importance of a free people asking questions. One of the things I'm most disturbed about right now with regard to our reaction as a country is that we are virus shaming anyone that dares raise their hand and ask a question or step out of line. We actually treat them as if they're Typhoid Mary and you're going to kill grandma because you're not falling in line and marching off to the gulag. Now, let me be clear, Debbie, I'm not suggesting that I think the virus is a hoax. I'm acknowledging that there's a real disease, but I also think as a free people, we should be asking some very important questions. Otherwise, we're going to fall prey to the disease of ideology, the disease of fascism, ideological fascism, which the colleges and universities have already fallen prey to long before this particular crisis. I posted something the other day and I asked these questions. I said, are life and liberty both paramount values in America? Is liberty still a first thing for Americans, or are we willing to set it aside every time we feel like we're going to get sick? Is liberty a self-evident truth and an unalienable right, just as much as life? Are we willing to defend liberty as vigorously as we protect our lives? Are we willing to do as our founding fathers did and risk our lives in the defense of liberty? Are we going to suspend the Constitution every time there's a threat of large-scale illness in the country? We've got to be asking these questions. And if we don't, I feel as if we're taking Patrick Henry's statement, give me liberty or give me death, and turning it on its head and saying, I fear death, so take my liberty.
We're saying we'll take death. We'll take that if those are our choices. This is a fabulous beginning to our talk today, and I'm so glad you're available to talk about these ideas. I love, first of all, your point that we are losing. In fact, I wrote it down, virus shaming. I'm going to borrow that phrase from you because it really is. It's an astonishing thing, even among people, generally speaking, the same side of the political aisle, same side of the aisle and kind of in the ballpark of thinking, are just frozen by the fear of this virus to the point that they are willing pretty much anything the government says. They just are waiting to be told their next step. And I think I will say, I've been saying this in the show this week, but I think when the virus first came along, many Americans in government and obviously millions of citizens had no idea what it was all about, felt alarmed by it, and felt a little bit like, okay, we got a crisis here, kind of like a tornado is coming or something. So we said, okay, tornado, fine, we understand we're supposed to stay at home and, whatever, get inside the house and get into a secure place. But we're past that now. We're past that initial phase, and we're starting to see not just the surrender to government orders, but it is policing of other citizens. You should describe, I think you described in one of your columns, what happened when you tried to pose those questions you just mentioned on your social media.
Well, here, let me give you one example, an anecdote. one of the people that challenged me in the line of questionings that I just proposed to you was the director of an international organization for religious freedom. You probably know who he is. I'm not going to mention the name of the organization, and I won't mention his name. I won't be Bush League on your show. But I will say a director of an international organization for religious freedom responded to me with this quote: "Freedom of belief is not an absolute." He said that. Freedom of belief is not an absolute. In other words, set your freedom of belief aside and go quarantine yourself. I thought, I'm stunned. I'm stunned that somebody who makes his life, it makes his living, has given his soul to the cause of religious freedom is telling me that freedom of belief, that's his language, is not an absolute. If that's where we are as a people, we are in trouble.
We are. I wrote that down because I don't even really understand what he means by, okay, we used to say it's a funny thing when our kids were growing up. If you would say, did you make your bed this morning? And they would answer, I did my math homework. He said, objection, non-responsive. I asked you, because it was a funny thing to say in our house. But I don't understand exactly what he means. It's because he's saying if you don't believe all of these virus warnings, is that what he's questioning? I don't understand his question. Do you?
Yes, in the context, he was challenging my line of thinking, and that is, wait a second, is liberty a paramount value equal to life? And is life worth living? Okay. Is life worth living if it's not free? Are we willing to sacrifice our lives for the cause of liberty like our founding fathers did in the American Revolution? Does the church, now see, I think the church should be leading on the issue of showing deference to its neighbor. If eating meat offends my brother, then I won't eat meat. Well, if breaking quarantine offends my brother, then I probably shouldn't break quarantine. But I shouldn't just sit back and allow the government to demand it. I should say, government, you have no right to tell me what to do. But as a Christian, as a follower of Christ, I'm going to show deference to my neighbor and make them feel comfortable as I serve them. There's a totally different issue here in play than kowtowing and bowing to the government's demands.
Could not agree more. It is the large question of mandate versus individual personal responsibility and individual consideration. What is your view? I meant to ask this. I meant to mention earlier, I wanted to ask you, but what do you think about the orders around the country that are saying that church, because more than 10 people cannot be together in one place, even if they are separated by their 6 feet social distancing, that churches cannot be open? Do you have a thought about that one?
I don't think the government has any business telling the church what to do. However, I think it is a bit Bush League, I'll use that word again, or that term again, for pastors to just rub their neighbor's nose in their freedom. Let's go back to Paul's admonition of eating meat. If it offends somebody, don't eat meat. Paul was saying, I have the freedom to do this. Nobody has the right not to tell me to do this, but I'm going to choose not to do it because I know it offends my weaker brother. And therefore, if my neighbor is scared, if my neighbor isn't a believer, if my neighbor is all tied up in knots over the coronavirus, I probably shouldn't rub his nose in my freedom. I might want to show deference to him. But at the same time, I'm going to scream from the rooftops, the government has no business telling me anything to do when it comes to my religious freedom. I think I can do both things at the same time is my point. Plus, I think the churches should get and could get very creative in the way they conduct their services. Have your services in a parking lot so that you're 6 feet apart in your cars. Go back to the old California model and the Texas model where you actually had drive-in theaters being used as churches. Why not do that rather than just shut it down? Why don't go to the beach? Stay in your cars at the beach. Let the pastor preach to you from an intercom system so that everybody in the world can hear it, not just the church attendees. Why don't we get creative like that rather than just kowtowing and shutting it down?
I love those ideas. I really can relate to your point too about not rubbing it in people's noses. I have dear friends who are either very senior or have some other health condition who are very, very alarmed and they want to stay home. They don't want to go anywhere. They want someone to deliver their groceries to the front step and leave it there and run away. I respect their concerns. I do not want them to be uncomfortable. I wouldn't mock or question them. But it's so odd what's happened in our culture. We have the people who want to be the stay-at-home ones, mocking and ridiculing the people who are saying, I'm a little bit worried about the political direction we're headed. The mandates are coming from the government, but the shaming and scorning is coming from neighbor to neighbor, from friend to friend. And the idea that we're going to make you feel guilty because you decided today, I'm going to go for a walk with my husband, who's, already within 6 feet of me in my home. And people are just, even that, I'm aware of people being, and I think in addition to the legal and constitutional question, we're seeing a shift in our culture. It's like a cultural diminishing of the way we respect each other.
Actually, we've exposed something in our culture that I've been suspicious of as a college president, and that is ideological fascism. If you don't submit, you don't agree, if you're not part of the group, if you don't march lockstep with everybody else, we will shame you, we will silence you, you're verboten, we will crush you. That's been happening on the college campus for the last several years. That's what No Safe Spaces, Dennis Prager and Adam Carolla's movie is all about. It's what Ben Shapiro has been exposed to when he's tried to speak at Berkeley. They've been shamed. They've been shut down. And now it's culture-wide, it's countrywide, and that is frightening. And here's another twist on it, Debbie. If the people listening to your show don't think that our enemies are watching and taking note at how easy it is to bring us to our knees without firing a shot, wake up and smell the coffee. If we don't think that people are watching and seeing how easy it was to shut down the economy, shut down the Constitution, and let everybody bow in submission, my land, what's going to happen the next time they actually decide to threaten us if we were this easy to conquer this time?
I agree with that about our enemies, our foreign enemies, certainly China being the main player now. There are all sorts of stories out about China is through their representatives in countries around the world trying to lay blame at America's feet for the coronavirus. They are talking about they want Mike Pompeo removed as Secretary of State because he is calling out their propaganda war. They're watching America crumble, watching our economy crumble. And the economy, as I keep saying, it's not about greedy people wanting more money. The economy is about everyday life, people being able to work, earn, put food in their table. And this weakening of America, I'm another shaming, social shaming that happens, virus shaming, is criticism of anyone who says, shouldn't we also be taking into account the impact on our economy, and our businesses and our families' abilities to support themselves, in addition to trying to stop the spread of coronavirus? What's your thought on that?
Well, we've got to take account of the economy. I think back to what was it? The Bill Gaither song. I'm trying to look it up here while we're talking. The Bill Gaither song of 1970, where he talked about the market street is empty. There's no traffic. The market square is empty. There's no traffic in the street. Housewives cease their labor. And then he proceeds to talk about the king is coming. The king is coming. Now, we are actually, I remember as a kid listening to that song and thinking, how would that ever happen? How in the world would that ever take place? Here are the lyrics. The marketplace is empty. There's no more traffic in the streets. All the builders' tools are silent. No more time to harvest wheat. Busy housewives cease their labor. In the courtroom, no debate. What on earth? Work on earth is all suspended as the king comes through the gate. I remember thinking as a teenager that was apocalyptic and it would be impossible for that to ever happen. I didn't understand how that could be a biblical prophecy that would ever come into play. We're watching it. We're watching it before our very eyes.
I know. And I don't know, the church has a great role to play in this country, certainly in the kinds of ways you were describing, to continue offering services and allowing people different ways to access the sermons and the service. I've noticed now on online Bible studies or Zoom Bible studies, people communicating with each other using what we have. But I wish that we'd see the church more willing to, in addition, speak up about we're stepping into a dangerous place of repression of our freedom as a country, and we're doing it out of fear. But that has never been, the Bible is full of fear not, fear not, fear not. And I wish the church would have at some point a little more voice. Church isn't just one thing, but the Christian church in America to say, we don't surrender our freedom here. We know what happens. Do you think the church could play a bigger role?
Absolutely. The church always has played this role. And here's the positive side of the story. We have seen for 2,000 years that Christ's promise that the gates of hell will not prevail against his church, Christ keeps his promise. So I'm not fearful that the church is going to go away. I'm not fearful that somehow Jesus is going to lose. This doesn't surprise God. We worship God incarnate, the Word made flesh and dwelling among us, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, the Lion of Judah, the Lamb of God. Jesus is God. This storm does not catch him unawares. He chose to get in the boat. He was in the boat on Galilee when the storm came up, but he went to sleep and took a nap. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in a sermon that he delivered in the midst of World War II, said this: only faith allows you to sleep. That's why Jesus was able to sleep in the boat, because obviously the Son of God had ultimate faith. We need to recognize that this will be okay. We can relax and take a nap, if you will, in the boat. But then we need to wake up and recognize that the man who's in the boat with us, God incarnate in the boat with us, can still the storm and expects us to play a role in doing so. It is our responsibility to be the hands, the feet, the mouth, the eyes, the voice of Christ in the midst of the crisis. It is our job to calm the storm.
Wow, I love that. I will tell you that you're touching on all these points you made in your various Washington Times columns. I want to mention to our readers again, you wrote to, first of all, you were talking to Dr. Everett Piper, and second, he does write, in addition to having written Not a Daycare, very good book, very great short column, very good book, but also columns he writes for Washington Times. I kind of, this show is very political, and I'm always talking about preserving America and the founding liberties. But what you are able to do so well with your life experience is to take biblical truth in a practical, everyday, conversational way and apply the deep truths of the scriptures to the issues that we face today. And so I'm thrilled to hear you're talking about the church that way. And I keep waiting for more Christian leaders to say, well, I'm going to go off on people again in a minute, but more Christian leaders to say, we need to be very careful. No, God isn't going to be harmed. Jesus is not going to change. Truth is not going to change. But in this shepherding of America through this crisis, we do, as Christians, have a role, a wonderful role, to inspire and encourage and care and provide solace, but really to be leaders of people who say that if we stand up for freedom, we should expect to be rewarded and defended, not endangered.
The story of the Bible is replete with being tested by fire, being refined by fire. We forget in America, I think, Debbie, that life isn't always easy, nor is it supposed to be easy. That's not the way the world is created. We live in a broken world. We live with in the reality of the original sin playing itself out on the nightly news. G.K. Chesterton said that the only empirically verifiable, provable aspect of all of Christian theology is the original sin. And if you doubt it, turn on the nightly news, pick up the newspaper, and you see that truth. The original sin is playing itself out. What we have right now is a combination of natural disaster and human reaction to it. Both of those things are broken. But in the midst of that, the biblical story is it's the believer's responsibility to step into the storm, not run away from it, to tackle it with confidence and courage, not cower in the corner. It is our responsibility basically to do what Rahm Emanuel said, and I'm no fan of Barack Obama and Rahm Emanuel. However, what Emanuel said has great wisdom implied in it, and that is, don't let this crisis go to waste. Never let a good crisis go to waste. It is our responsibility as believers to grab the crisis and to massage it and manipulate it to the advantage of freedom and human dignity.
Okay, I have never heard that Rahm Emanuel quote used for people who are trying to stand up for freedom, for America, for the founding ideas, for Christianity. It's always used, and I've been using it talking about how I see the left taking advantage of people's fear and expanding government power and collectivist behavior in Washington. But okay, I'm going to remember that. So I have three things now I've learned in this I'm going to remember from you. Last thing I wanted, so you wrote a piece in Washington Times, which is called, "Why Do Elected Officials Dismiss Positive Information About the Coronavirus?" That is the truest story. You can have the best news or all sorts of good bits of information coming out recently, But you can't talk about that. We don't go there. So what's your answer? Why do they dismiss it? Good news.
Groupthink. This is a massive textbook example of international groupthink. We're all just buying into the narrative without raising our hand and saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. I walked by the hospital yesterday and it wasn't overflowing with people on the sidewalks. I read that story about that infant dying in Louisiana, and you said that the infant died of COVID-19, but the infant was premature. It was born at 22 weeks. Don't tell me that infant died of COVID-19. The infant died because it was premature. It was 20 weeks old. To quote a doctor that was talking about this, it was half-baked. It wasn't fully baked. The infant was struggling because of the reality of being premature. We need to ask questions and expose the propensity of the human mind to go after the negative, to be sensational, to be hyperbolic, to instill hysteria because that sells. We need to challenge this as confident believers and say, whoa, 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 I'm not sure that's true. And don't let anybody virus shame you into silence. You're not Typhoid Mary just because you're asking the question.
And with that quote, you're not Typhoid Mary because you're asking the question. That's a great line. Well, I'm so glad you're available to talk today. And I guess most of America was kind of in our shelter-in-place mode. So we are in our home. So I'm so glad we could do this today. Well, thank you for all you do. Your writing on Washington Times and your continued advocacy for the ideas that you laid out in Not a Daycare. And your just energy and love for Christianity and our country as a nation of faith. So I just thank you so much for all you do. And thank you for joining me today.
Oh, I'm honored to be on your show. Blessings, be safe, be healthy, and be free.
And be free, and happy Easter, sir.
Likewise.
Thank you. So, my friends, as Dr. Everett Piper, so glad he could join us. And honestly, I knew we'd have a very energetic and spirited conversation. Every story we talked about, his columns on Washington Times, are available on our website. If you go to americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under shows, drop down list of links, you can read all of his columns. He just is so good at taking the issues of the day and really applying a lot of what he has come to learn and understand about the place of faith, but in a very it's not like sitting through a sermon. It's a very vibrant engaging on the issues. I did want to mention, before I go to my last topic today, I'm going to talk about the virus killing America's small businesses. There was actually in the beginning of the first 5 today, I talked about the idea that the Surgeon General is trying to warn America, other experts are, that we're going to have the worst week ever. And I encourage people of faith to challenge that and to get into the fighting spirit for preserving this country, preserving freedom, because it is under assault in America. But there's also good news that, as we were just talking to a Dr. Piper, never makes it to the headlines. So one just little story, but I wanted to show you this picture. There's a woman who was actually astonishingly brave in the midst of this virus shaming, to use Dr. Everett Piper's term. She is a Democrat member of the state legislature in the state of Michigan. Her name is Karen Whitsitt. We'll put her picture up and tell you what she did that I think is so brave. First of all, great smile, looks like a very happy person. So she is a Democrat member of the legislature in Michigan, from representing an area in Detroit. She came out in the news and said she wanted to thank President Trump and the hydroxychloroquine, the medication that we still have Dr. Fauci denouncing, but President Trump had talked about. Doctors in France have done tests and come out with, yes, this is curing and there's no more reason. This is helping people who are suffering with COVID-19. This brave woman, a Democrat from Michigan, came out, national story, to say she thanks President Trump and hydroxychloroquine because she was diagnosed with COVID-19. She actually began taking the hydroxychloroquine even before her diagnosis came back. She had her test done, but it wasn't one of the quick ones. But she had all the symptoms, so her doctor prescribed for her hydroxychloroquine, which is what she took, and she is perfectly healthy. And I just want to tell you, there are just so many other bits of good news floating around that is ignored by the media, because it's so much easier, more enticing when you're in the media to focus on death and symptoms and shortages and fear. These things propel the media, every story out there. But But I will tell you just a few other quick things that were just positive news related to coronavirus and COVID-19. One is that this is not all the way positive, but I'm very much holding out hope. The United Kingdom's Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, as you know, was diagnosed with, he has coronavirus, he developed COVID-19, he is in the hospital, and he was even moved to the ICU, but they announced, I think this morning, or late last night, that in the ICU, he did not need to be put on a ventilator. He does not have pneumonia. He's in the ICU, obviously, because they're taking extreme precautions. But the point is, he is someone who is, urging his own country. We got to fight this. And he's fighting himself. But actually, more specific good news. Italy and Spain, two of the countries hard hit, have finally broken the upward swing in their pace of cases. These two hardest hit European nations are finally seeing fewer rather than more of caseload of the infection occurring. Italy's prime minister has offered President Trump and the United States effusive praise for their help. If you listen to mainstream media in America, you would think that Trump has not made one good decision or taken one positive action since the moment coronavirus sprang on the scene in the world. Clearly, the people who know what they're talking about are not buying into that. But it was a wonderful thing, the Prime Minister of Italy. And these are things that President Trump did behind the scenes, not seeking headlines, seeking to help. Third, Austria is reopening itself for business again as soon as April 14th, as is Denmark, with respect to schools. So there are steps that are positive in the world. And I'm not going to give a Pollyanna presentation and say everything's great, march on, we're over this crisis, because we're not. We're going to be dealing with it for a while. We have many, many pieces of good news, and I encourage you to remember those too, and to remember that we're seeing wonderful results in this country and around the world with this new medication, hydroxychloroquine. We are seeing cases of recovery. We're seeing more and more people who have, and again, the number is something like the percentage of people in the world who do happen to contract coronavirus or contract COVID-19. It's like 98% of the people survive. Keep that number in mind. 98% survive. So, we have this doomsday fear of moving that has enveloped this country and enveloped the world. We have to keep those bigger numbers in mind. I'm going to go through tomorrow on this show a great deal of data related to where we really are, contrasting numbers of all kinds and making the point that when the media has a chance to contrast numbers and make comparisons, they go about it in the way that makes Americans more fearful, more worried, more just cowering in their homes in fear. It is so intentionally, deceptively dishonest.